The city of Fairbridge lies in the northwestern region of the United States, near a broad river flowing toward the ocean. Though serene at first glance, under the quiet surface of the river lurk strong currents that stir, especially when storms strike at night. The city's name comes from its iconic old arch bridge spanning the water, used daily by locals crossing between the historic district and the modern, bustling downtown. Right in Fairbridge's center stands the Fairbridge County Courthouse, built on a spacious lot early in the 20th century. Its towering marble columns line the entrance. The main lobby floor displays intricate mosaic tiles, and a grand relief of the scales of justice is hung above. Inside, multiple courtrooms open off a long corridor beneath a stained glass dome, where morning light filters through in soft, multicolored patterns onto the polished marble floors. The events of our story unfold in late November, when the weather is turning cold and damp. The scarce rays of winter sun slant through the courthouse's tall windows, stretching shadows of the people attending a high-profile court hearing. People huddle in thick coats, scarves, and boots, exhaling misty breaths in the chilled air. Yet the real tension is not from the brisk temperature, but from the atmosphere inside the courtroom that day. This courtroom session has attracted many residents of Fairbridge. A young white man in his early 20s, Robert Landon, hailing from a poor riverside neighborhood, is being tried for assaulting an elderly woman to the point of hospitalization and stealing her money. The media has taken special interest in the case due to the brutality described by the prosecution. The elderly victim was hospitalized, lost valuables, and suffered severe trauma. In recent years, Fairbridge has experienced a rise in street crime, especially robbery and violence. The police department has been criticized for letting lawless pockets develop near the riverfront. Consequently, Robert's trial is viewed as a prime example of cracking down on criminals. The prosecution's evidence seems solid at first glance. Partial forensic matches, a few eyewitnesses, plus Robert's prior financial troubles and hot-tempered reputation. Yet Robert's defense attorney, a worn-looking middle-aged man with limited resources, insists that an alibi was overlooked and that the evidence against Robert appears to be conveniently discovered. He argues that the charges are built on assumptions rather than solid proof. Outside the courthouse, reporters stand guard in a light drizzle. Cameras roll, microphones at the ready, notebooks filling up with interviews of anyone stepping in and out. They eagerly await a sensational headline. Will Robert be convicted on the spot? How many years might he face? Or might there be a twist? Inside the courthouse hall, curious onlookers, the victim's family, Robert's acquaintances, legal observers, and law students gather. Everyone seems anxious, hoping for clarity regarding the case. No one suspects that this seemingly straightforward trial will expose a revered police officer at the heart of Fairbridge's justice system. Among those quietly entering courtroom number 4 is Harriet Gray, a woman of color in her early 30s. She owns a small grocery store close to Fairbridge's riverside slums. Petite but energetic, she wears a beige wool coat, a dark blue scarf, and sturdy boots against the drizzle. She grips the hand of her 5-year-old son, John, a lively boy with curly hair, wide eyes, and rosy cheeks, who clutches a small, worn-out blue toy car that has seen better days. Harriet never intended for John to be in a tense environment like a courtroom. Yet she's been summoned as a witness because her shop was open late on the night of the assault and she might have glimpsed or heard something relevant. Lacking childcare options, she had no choice but to bring John along. She hopes the proceedings end quickly so she can return to her store. Seated at the defendant's table in handcuffs, Robert Landon appears pale and shaken. With no family or close friends to back him, he comes from a cramped, run-down neighborhood by the river. Dressed in old, threadbare clothes, his face reflects sleepless nights and a tormented mind. The prosecution paints him as a desperate criminal attacking an innocent elderly woman for money. But those who look carefully see a flicker of indignation in his eyes, as though he is crying out for justice in a world unwilling to hear. Several police officers are stationed to maintain order, most notably Sergeant Gerald Cross. He is a tall black man in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with a firm jaw. Sergeant Cross has built a reputation for discipline and effectiveness, earning multiple commendations. To the public, he is the epitome of a dedicated officer, credited with preventing crime spikes in troubled areas. Wearing a sharply pressed dark blue uniform, polished black shoes, and a neatly knotted tie, Cross carries himself with calm authority. He is often referred to as the backbone of law enforcement in Fairbridge. Courtroom number 4 is spacious but filled to capacity. The gallery of seats is crowded with onlookers, and the buzzing conversation quiets as the hearing begins. Presiding Judge Margaret Bellinger, an experienced middle-aged woman with her hair in a neat bun, raps her gavel and calls for order. Prosecutor Stephen Garfield stands to present the charges. On that evening, victim Thelma Whitaker was assaulted at around 8 p.m. She lost her wallet, jewelry, and phone. The defendant, Robert Landon, was short on money and had debts. Surveillance footage from nearby allegedly shows a figure resembling Landon, and multiple witnesses claim they saw someone in a hoodie much like the one Landon owns. Your Honor, we believe the evidence is sufficient to convict. Robert's defense lawyer, Peter Holmes, a grizzled man who flips through documents deliberately, addresses the court in a gravelly voice. Your Honor, my client insists he was at a bar across the river from 7 to 9 that evening, with multiple witnesses who were never properly interviewed. A million hoodies look alike. As for that surveillance footage, it's too blurry. The two sides go back and forth. The prosecution appears confident. The defense points to inadequate police work and questionable assumptions. In the back row, Harriet attempts to keep John quiet by letting him roll his toy car along the wooden bench. He occasionally imitates engine sounds under his breath. She hushes him softly so as not to interrupt the proceedings. Suddenly, a side door opens. More uniformed officers enter, including Sergeant Gerald Cross. They spread out at the rear of the courtroom, prepared for any disruption. John, busily moving his toy car, abruptly stops. He looks up and spots Cross. His eyes widen as if recognizing someone. The toy car slips from his small hand and falls to the floor with a tap. Harriet notices John's transfixed expression and leans over, confused, when John blurts out in his clear, piping voice, "Mom, that's him. He was there that night." A ripple of shock breaks the courtroom's hush. Several heads turn, seeking the source of the child's voice. Harriet, startled, places her hands on John's shoulders, whispering, "John, what are you saying?" Yet the boy persists. "I saw him. That night, near our shop. I remember him." Sergeant Cross stands rooted in place. His gaze meets John's unwavering stare. For a brief moment, Cross's jaw seems to clench and he shifts back a step. It is a small but revealing gesture. Judge Bellinger, astonished, taps her gavel. "Order! We will suspend proceedings to investigate this matter." Excited murmurs surge through the crowd. It's rare to hear an accusation directed at one of the city's most respected officers. Reporters hurry to take notes. Even Robert Landon, slumped in his seat, lifts his head in sudden hope, as though a miracle has entered this bleak chamber. Once the court is in recess, Harriet is ushered into a consultation room off the hallway. Prosecutor Stephen Garfield joins her, his expression grave. He glances at John, then addresses Harriet. "Your son just said he was there that night. Ms. Gray, can you confirm, did you see Sergeant Cross near the scene?" Harriet is flustered. She recalls the night of the assault. She was closing her shop late, saw a black car parked outside, then a fleeting figure. She never gave it much thought. Now Harriet speaks honestly. "I'm not sure. It was dark. I only remember a black car pulled up briefly, but I couldn't make out who it was." Garfield studies her, then turns to John. "Son, can you tell us again what you saw?" "I saw him standing in the alley by our shop. He was talking to somebody. Then he got in the black car and drove away. It had 2 red lights in the back. I remember." Though John's words carry childlike phrasing, there is a stark sincerity. A flicker of concern crosses Garfield's face. He immediately phones his team. "We need to pull every camera feed from that neighborhood, every angle available. We're looking for a black vehicle around the time of the assault." 15 minutes later, Garfield's assistant brings a laptop with footage from a nearby business. The black and white images are grainy. A black car rolls up to the curb by the alley at the very time of the assault. Although the shot is blurry, the silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with notable confidence, looks eerily similar to Cross's unmistakable stance. Garfield frowns. "We can't see the face clearly, but the build, definitely Cross." John points at the screen, emphatic. That's him. Harriet's heart sinks. Why would a model officer be at that site during the exact time of the crime? Accident? Or something more sinister? Garfield orders his assistant. We also need footage from the alley's other camera, the one installed by a resident. If it's clear, we might get a full view of his face. An hour later, the team retrieves a second surveillance video, this time with better resolution. Under the alley's dim street lamp, they see Sergeant Gerald Cross, plain clothes but with a recognizable build, emerging from a black car. The timestamp perfectly coincides with the assault on Thelma Whitaker just steps away. Garfield's face hardens and he turns to Harriet and John. There's no doubt now. Cross lied in his official statement that he was patrolling elsewhere. What on earth is going on with this highly decorated officer? Prosecutor Garfield directs his staff to probe Cross's financial records and recheck past cases. Soon they discover a distressing pattern. Money transfers into Cross's account after certain high-profile arrests traced to shell companies. Multiple cases where evidence suddenly appeared or crucial video footage mysteriously vanished at pivotal moments. Most suspects arrested were from marginalized backgrounds, lacking resources or support to challenge suspicious police work. The emerging picture suggests Cross was orchestrating, or at least cooperating with criminals, possibly receiving bribes, manufacturing cases to inflate his hero image, then profiting from capturing petty offenders. In that scenario, Robert Landon was framed, a poor, easy target who wouldn't be believed if he claimed innocence. Harriet Gray trembles as the truth comes into focus. She is an ordinary business owner, not a lawyer or law enforcer. Yet her 5-year-old son's accidental truth has begun to expose a top figure in law enforcement. She fears Cross might lash out. Garfield speaks gravely. You and your son should be careful. If Cross senses he's cornered, he could react dangerously. I'll arrange some protection for you. Harriet clutches John protectively, dread churning in her gut. No longer can she pretend ignorance. Cross is not just any suspect, but a powerful man with deep connections. She prays he won't come after them. As time passes, the court postpones Robert Landon's trial to reevaluate the evidence. Garfield's team works round the clock, uncovering leads that could arrest Sergeant Cross. But unexpectedly, Cross goes off the radar. He doesn't report to the station, doesn't answer calls, and is nowhere to be found. Soon, rumors swirl in Fairbridge. Cross went rogue. He's on the run. Could Cross silence the witnesses? The media churns out sensational stories. Residents fear that if such an exemplary officer is corrupt, maybe the entire system is at risk. That afternoon, Harriet packs a small suitcase with clothing, vital documents, and some emergency cash. She plans to drive John away from their Riverside apartment to avoid any vengeful attack from Cross. Prosecutor Garfield assigns 2 plainclothes officers to watch her building. Harriet contacts her sister, who lives about 50 miles outside Fairbridge, to see if they can stay there for a while. John looks up at his mother with wide eyes. Mom, why do we have to go? Because we need to be somewhere safer, sweetheart. Don't worry, I'll protect you. Although Harriet tries to sound brave, her heart races. She's never fled from anyone in her life, let alone from a dangerous, high-ranking policeman. Before sunrise the next day, Harriet straps John into the back seat of her old sedan, turning the ignition amid the sputtering engine. The 2 undercover officers follow in an unmarked vehicle. The plan is to get onto the highway, pass through a forested stretch, and reach her sister's house on the outskirts. Streetlights glow faintly as Harriet navigates the mostly empty roads. She glances in the rearview mirror now and then, seeing the officer's car trailing close behind. She exhales, trying to stay calm. Suddenly, Harriet notices a black car at the far end of an intersecting street, which soon appears in her mirror. Her heart thuds. It can't be a coincidence. It's likely Cross. The officers behind her flash their car's lights, signaling the black car to pull over. Instead, it accelerates, weaving erratically. Sirens wail, shattering the early morning silence. John, startled, asks, "Mommy, what's happening?" "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," Harriet says, her voice tense yet soothing. The black car streaks forward, pulling alongside Harriet's sedan as if trying to block her. The officers speed up, sirens blazing, attempting to intercept. Tires squeal on the damp pavement. Harriet clenches her jaw, pressing the gas pedal harder, determined to reach the highway. John clings to his seatbelt in fear. "He's trying to stop us, Mom!" Harriet stays silent, adrenaline pumping, and keeps driving. After several frantic turns, the black car is forced aside by the pursuing officers. Harriet veers onto another street, narrowly avoiding collision. Through her side mirror, she catches a glimpse of Sergeant Cross behind the wheel, his face twisted in desperation. She shudders. Gone is his calm, upstanding persona. He has become a man with nothing left to lose. He's willing to do anything. Confront Harriet, maybe worse. On a wide thoroughfare, Harriet realizes the police are calling for backup. Sirens begin to echo from distant blocks. But Harriet knows Cross might still corner her if she stays on empty roads. In a desperate move, she decides, "I'll drive downtown where it's busier. He might hesitate to act in front of crowds." It's risky because morning traffic is building. But Harriet believes it's safer than a deserted route. Turning, she speeds toward downtown Fairbridge, navigating busy streets lined with office towers, cafes, and the Central Park. Horns blare, passers-by watch in alarm as sirens blast past them in the drizzle. Cross remains in pursuit, ignoring the swirling lights of the patrol cars. Harriet's old sedan strains as she floors the accelerator, pulse hammering. John, strapped in the back, stares wide-eyed, tears brimming. She swerves into Riverside Square, a plaza with a large fountain at its center. Pedestrians and morning commuters scatter at the sound of sirens. Cross tries to turn in after her, nearly hitting a metal railing. Two police cars move in to box him. One officer waves frantically at Harriet to pull over. Her car screeches to a halt in the middle of the plaza, John jerking forward but held back by his seatbelt. The pursuing officers exit their vehicles, guns drawn, shouting at Cross to get out of his car with his hands up. Bystanders scream and duck behind benches, some filming the dramatic scene with their phones. Suddenly, rain begins to fall heavily. Cross remains inside his black car for a tense second, glaring. Harriet senses the standoff. If he's armed and desperate, this could end badly. Finally, Cross throws open the door. He emerges, lifting his hands halfway, rain beating against his uniform, soaking his hair. He stands rigid as multiple officers aim firearms at him. He sweeps his gaze toward Harriet and John, who remain in their car, trembling. For an instant, Harriet fears he might shout or draw a weapon. Instead, he stands under the deluge, face contorted in rage and despair, and growls, "You people don't get it. I had no choice. I did it because the city demanded results, demanded criminals for their statistics. Everyone calls me a hero, but I was just a cog in a broken machine." He clenches his fists, no longer the stoic policeman. Officers bark. "Down on your knees, remove your firearm, Cross." Cross snarls like a trapped animal, but ultimately complies. Rain pours on him, reflecting the flashing lights of the squad cars. His moral battle is over. He kneels on the wet pavement, hands behind his head, letting his fellow officers place him in handcuffs. From her sedan, Harriet hugs John tight, tears mingling with relief. She realizes it was her child's innocent truth that brought down the hidden monster wearing a hero's badge. With Cross in custody, his initial statements lead authorities to an entire network of corruption involving bribes, frame-ups, and intimidation. In the assault on Mrs. Whitaker, Cross did not assault her himself but conspired with associates who did. Cross planted evidence implicating Robert Landon, ensuring an easy conviction while preserving his own image. Robert Landon, it turns out, was just a patsy set up by Cross, someone poor, voiceless, and unlikely to muster a proper defense. As more witnesses feel safe to come forward, Robert's innocence becomes clearer. The charges against him are dropped, although formalities take time. He leaves jail feeling vindicated, if shaken. When Harriet and John finally return to their small apartment, the ordeal has left Harriet looking thin and exhausted. She is relieved that Cross's rampage didn't end in tragedy. John still suffers nightmares, occasionally waking in terror at the memory of the black car chasing them, or Cross's furious face. Harriet calms him with bedtime stories and gentle reassurances. Prosecutor Garfield sends an official letter of gratitude, confirming that John's testimony was a vital piece of the puzzle. Garfield also promises that Harriet will be under protection and might be called to testify in future hearings when Cross is brought to trial for corruption and abuse of power. Harriet, though nervous, is willing to stand for the truth. Once out, Robert Landon returns to his run-down boarding house, though reporters occasionally pester him with questions. He wants no publicity, only to rebuild his shattered life. His lawyer, Peter Holmes, works on clearing Robert's record completely. With help from a non-profit legal organization, Robert eventually lands a stable job at a nearby recycling plant. He remembers how a 5-year-old boy in the courtroom spoke out at the crucial moment. Without that child's words, Robert might have spent years behind bars on a false conviction. Weeks later, Harriet is invited to a recognition ceremony organized by Fairbridge's mayor, honoring citizens who have contributed to justice. She and John attend, feeling a bit overwhelmed, and are introduced to the newly appointed deputy police chief, Diana Miller. A seasoned, principled woman with a reputation for integrity, Miller shakes Harriet's hand and kneels to address John warmly. "Young man, do you realize you helped us see the truth? Never be afraid to speak up when something's wrong." John glances at his mother, nods shyly, and receives the applause of everyone gathered. It's a touching moment for the mother and son who had risked their safety in pursuit of justice. Cross's arrest resonates as a wake-up call to the entire city. Not every uniform stands for truth, and not every piece of evidence is beyond doubt. The boundary between law and wrongdoing can blur, especially when power is abused. The police department undergoes a thorough internal investigation. Cross's former colleagues, once proud of their champion, now feel betrayed. A comprehensive reform program is launched, promising more transparency and better accountability. Robert Landon struggles to find normalcy but remains hopeful, saving money in hopes of moving away from the blighted river area. He occasionally stops by Harriet's store to buy candy for John, a quiet gesture of gratitude to the family that unwittingly saved him. Harriet Gray continues running her little grocery, even starting night classes in accounting, hoping to expand her business one day. She has grown stronger, refusing to ignore or fear injustice anymore. She wants to teach her son about courage and faith in what's right. And John? He grows up with a legendary story, the 5-year-old whose testimony rocked Fairbridge. Years later, he'll recall pointing his finger at Sergeant Cross in that fateful courtroom. Sometimes he asks Harriet, "What if I hadn't said anything?" She answers gently, "Then an innocent man might still be locked up, and a criminal would walk free. We must never bury the truth, my boy." Winter continues in Fairbridge, the river calm yet cold, the old bridge reflecting on gray waters. Residents remain stunned by the revelations, yet encouraged by the hard lesson about protecting justice. They learn that true justice isn't guaranteed by a badge or a single figurehead. It requires transparency, diligence, and the voice of every ordinary citizen. Though the world is full of uncertainty, even the smallest actions and the purest words, like a child's honest statement, can upend an entire web of corruption. The key is that no one stands by silently. On a final winter day, Harriet and John cross the Fairbridge Bridge on their way to a family Thanksgiving. The boy hums a children's tune in the back seat as Harriet gazes out at the fading sunset glimmering on the water. She feels tears of relief and hope welling up. Behind them, the city lights of Fairbridge glow in readiness for a new chapter, one in which honest people's faith in justice might finally be rewarded.